Denise Richards from Drop Dead Gorgeous, also the new Bond girl. And Denise, you're ready. It is time for 5 questions. Here we go. Richards, right. What is the longest running film series in movie history?
James Bond.
That is correct. Wow.
In 1999, Bond was back, this time with another director, Michael Apted, who is best known for the acclaimed Up series of documentaries and The Coal Miner's Daughter. Although not an obvious choice to direct a Bond film, one of the reasons he was said to have taken the offer was because he didn't think he would ever get offered to direct a film like this again. But it looked like the producers wanted to try to focus a bit more on the characters and story this time around. Maybe that's what the series needed at this point. The title, The World Is Not Enough, would be a nod to Bond's family crest that was mentioned in Fleming's novel and the film on Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Good motto, eh? The world is not enough. Vivian's doing a splendid job.
The world is not enough.
Foolish sentiment.
Family motto.
This time we try to move away from the unstoppable force that's been Brosnan's Bond from the last 2 films, and see a bit more of a vulnerable side. He's physically injured with a bad shoulder in the film, and he becomes emotionally exposed when he allows himself to fall for the film's villainess, Electra King. Brosnan was said to have requested to be given more to play as Bond, to be able to get an opportunity to use some more acting, and not be a simple, straight-laced, flat-action hero who's just expected to act cool in between running from explosions. So The World Is Not Enough not only attempts to give Brosnan more to do, performance-wise, making Bond a bit more complex in his feelings and the situation he's in, but it also gives everyone in the film more to play. The villainess, the henchman, M, even Q, they're all given more dimensions and heavier scenes to play, and are expected to act a bit more. Well, almost everyone. Even with a story with more emotional impact than fans are used to in a Bond film, I always found World a very forgettable entry in the series. The one thing that really stands out about the film is how nothing really stands out. There are a few moments and scenes, but it's like I watch it and the majority of it just fades away. Unlike Tomorrow Never Dies, that was wall-to-wall action, The World spaces things out and tries to put the story and character center stage. There's more drama and actual performances, in most cases, but it's really no fun, and oddly enough, the Bond blueprint the series had established that the film tries to follow becomes a detriment to the story. In the end, the film seems most remembered for 2 things: containing the final appearance of a beloved character, and the notorious casting decision of a nuclear physicist. But before all that, the film begins with the longest pre-credit sequence in the series, at almost 15 minutes. This, once again, is not a standalone adventure, but sets up the plot for the story. It's actually pretty good. Bond is in Spain to retrieve Sir Robert King's money from some Swiss bankers. Maria Greza Cuncinata plays the banker's assistant. She's most commonly referred to as the cigar girl. She's really hot, and I wish she would have stuck around longer than in just the pre-credit sequence. Anyway, Bond asks for information about the murder of 0012. The situation intensifies as Bond kills some henchmen and the banker is killed before he can even talk. You can already tell this time out Brosnan is a bit more intense as Bond, with that cold stare he gives off. He does a pretty cool window leap to escape and is soon back in London at MI6. Bond returns the money to Sir Robert. M reveals they're old friends. The money explodes, killing Sir Robert, and Bond hops in Q's boat after the assassin who's sitting outside MI6. I'm not exactly sure why the cigar girl is out in the boat right where a hole explodes in the building. I would assume the target of this assassination is Sir Robert. Having the money being detonated by Sir Robert's lapel pin would indicate he would be close by it and thus getting blown to hell. So having the cigar girl out front with a giant gun was supposed to accomplish what exactly? In case Sir Robert survived the explosion and tried to get out of the room through the big hole in the wall, she could maybe shoot him? Or was she just supposed to take a shot at anyone who happened to look out? The whole point of the elaborate money explosion would seem that you could do this murder without needing anyone around to do it, and possibly getting caught. I don't know. Like I've said before, you have to have some suspension of disbelief with Bond films, and if you think about things too much, you would be just shaking your head instead of enjoying the film. Logically, Cigar Girl shouldn't be there. She should be in a pub watching the breaking news about the explosion. But if she was, then we wouldn't have gotten the boat chase. The boat chase is pretty good, with some decent stunts, with Bond getting thrown around trying to keep up with Cigar Girl. It's kind of a kick to see Bond get some action in on his home turf. The climax at the Millennium Dome and the hot air balloon seems like the film is already starting to go overboard, throwing as much as they can come up with at you. But it's still pretty fun. I especially like Bond's leap from the boat to the balloon's rope, an actual stunt performed by a real live human being. Much better than his GoldenEye leap after the plane. We say bye to Cigar Girl, even though I really wish we could have seen more of her. The balloon blows up, Bond falls, and actually gets himself injured, and finally the credits start to roll. I do like this opening. It manages to pack in a lot of exposition, setup, and stunt work into it, and it certainly holds my attention. But I always thought it was just a bit too long. By the end of it, I forgot that we hadn't even gotten to the opening credits yet. And I never like when Bond gets so reckless that he starts endangering innocent bystanders. Bond might take some risky moves, but he shouldn't be so careless that he becomes a menace to the public. He's supposed to be saving the public. What if there were a bunch of old ladies in this cafe, having brunch, and they weren't able to dive out of the way of this speeding boat? Nonsensical destruction becomes the norm for Brosnan's Bond. It starts to become this recurring joke.
Be careful, Em. I might try to steal him from you. Construction's not exactly my speciality.
Quite the opposite, in fact.
Still, it becomes the best action sequence in the entire film, and opens up the film with some real excitement. Unfortunately, as far as the action goes for the rest of the movie, it's all downhill from there. Once again, the credit sequence incorporates the major theme of the film, this time being oil. I guess it's okay. I mean, nothing spectacular or really memorable for me. The theme song by Garbage is not really my favorite, but at this point, I stopped expecting to like the opening songs. As the whole MI6 gang attends Sir Robert's funeral, we get our first introduction to Elektra King, played by Sophie Marceau, who I think is one of the better characters that Brosnan encounters during his Bond run. She's this mysterious woman with some heavy emotional baggage, and Brosnan and her have some genuine sparks towards the beginning of the film. But as things go on, the character of Elektra takes a real nosedive. Missions are dealt out at the MI6 headquarters in Scotland, a nice locale change from the usual M office scene. And we get to clearly see a female 00 agent at the briefing. There's supposedly a female 00 at the Thunderball briefing, but it's really difficult to be sure. There's a portrait of Bernard Lee on the wall in the background, too. Pretty cool. A nice subtle tip-of-the-hat reference to the late actor and his role in the series. The key word being subtle, something that gets ignored when the series pats itself on the back for its 40th anniversary. Learning he won't be on this mission because of his injured shoulder, Bond shags his doctor to get a clean bill of health. This injury seems like a setup that's going to have a payoff somewhere down the line. At least that's what it looks like at this point. I always thought the next scene was in an awkward spot. It's the traditional Q scene. Usually Bond meets up with Q after he's given his mission by M. So I'm not sure why Q and R are dealing him out his car and winter coat.
I thought you were on the inactive roster. Some kind of injury?
Yes, well, we'll see about that.
Why would he need this stuff if he's inactive? Is he going to test it out over the weekend or something? Whatever. Another thing that I always thought was kind of puzzling was this line.
Is it something I said?
No. Something you destroyed. My fishing boat. For my retirement. Away from you.
Fishing boat? Really? Would Q really be sitting in that boat casting off? I know he's a techie geek and would probably have some oddball stuff around his home.
Made one of these for the kids last Christmas.
But a fishing boat?
Let's go fishing! What are you hoping to catch?
I don't know. I know they wanted to establish that Q is readying for retirement, but I think they could have done it in a much less clunky way than that. Why not just 007, you destroyed my jet boat. It was to have been my last big project before my retirement. Now, grow up. Anyway, what follows is the final departure of Desmond Llewellyn as Q from the series, and the introduction of John Cleese as his assistant and eventual successor. Now, no matter what the series did, they would never, ever be able to replace Desmond Llewellyn as Q. He's been there from almost the very beginning and had become an institution to the series since 1963. So casting an established actor in the role, or going with an unknown for the part, it wouldn't matter. Whoever the choice was to have been, they would always be in Desmond's shadow. I like John Cleese, Monty Python, Fawlty Towers. He's great, and he plays his role here exactly as how you would expect. Stuffy attitude with sarcasm, quick little insults thrown around. But, you know, he's no Desmond Llewellyn. R gives Bond his car and his inflatable winter jacket before we bid adieu to Q. Fans all knew this time would be coming, and it's a decent send-off for the character, and it ends the scene on a solemn note. Regardless of the finality of the scene, Desmond had said he really had no plans of retiring from acting, and would have continued to play Q as long as he was able to, and the filmmakers still wanted him. Ironically, Desmond was killed in a car accident in December 1999, and the introduction of Cleese would be the seamless passing of the Q torch in the films. Bond does a bit of research on the history of Elektra and begins to get a little personally touched by it. M reveals she was asked to help when Elektra was kidnapped and instructed Sir Robert not to pay the ransom, so she's been carrying around some guilt about that. A lot of emotion swirling around in MI6 already. We learn Elektra's kidnapper, Renard the anarchist, is back, and is believed he will once again target Elektra. The character gets a very built-up introduction as we learn about his gimmick. Renard apparently has a bullet in his head, which now makes him feel no pain. This is all demonstrated with some fancy special effects work of a model of Robert Carlyle's head. Now, as always, you have to suspend some disbelief in Bond's world to accept this idea, which I'm more than willing to do. We've seen some pretty cool indestructible Bond henchmen in the series, so the bar is already set pretty high. Heck, just in Brosnan's last film we saw a guy who seemed like he wasn't feeling too much pain. This time with the film coming right out and telling us this guy is immune to pain, we should expect to see some pretty wild demonstrations of this characteristic. A bad guy who feels no pain, who's eventually going to be duking it out with Bond, who's already got a bad shoulder. I can't wait to see this. Despite Carlyle being a relatively small guy, he's effectively played some really scary characters in the past. So having him in the role, along with his no pain angle, should make him one of the most memorable Bond villains ever. This introduction certainly sets up some high expectations for the character and the fun laying ahead for us with him. But as usual in the Brosnan age, this idea is all set up and no payoff. Renard eventually becomes one of the most disappointing characters in the series. Bond heads to Azerbaijan, not the most visually stunning location, where Elektra is continuing construction on her father's oil pipeline from the Caspian Sea to Turkey. This is the first where we see Elektra draped in her robe-like clothing. She's always wearing some kind of sheets. Elektra refuses Bond's protection, but Bond tags along with her anyway, and this segues into the skiing action scene. It's an alright sequence. The flying Parahawk assassins are some cool new threats, but the whole thing just feels routine. They don't do anything particularly special other than ski and fly and fire machine guns. Plus, Bond doesn't so much defeat them as they defeat themselves. Just don't fly near the trees. Like this guy looks like he intentionally bombs his own pal. One of the problems the series faces is not only competing with other action films, but with itself and its own history. Just as a new Bond actor will inevitably be compared to his predecessors, action sequences will be held up against previous ones. It might not be fair, but that's how it is, at least for me. This ski chase pales with previous ski chases the series has done. The staging, the stunts, the editing. Like I said, it's alright, but nothing spectacular. Using the inflatable jacket allows for a nice quiet moment between Bond and Elektra after all the action, but the whole sequence isn't anything special.
Elektra! Elektra, look at me! Look at me! Look at my eyes! Look at my eyes! Look at my eyes! You're alright.
For some reason, every time the film starts building up momentum, revving things up that will lead into a potentially more interesting next scene, it just stops and goes off to somewhere else and tries to start up again. It's really weird. It's almost like the film was shot out of sequence and just never edited or something.
And who's afraid now, Mr. Bond?
It's like the air just gets let out of the balloon every time a new scene begins. Like at the end of the ski chase, Bond and Elektra share this moment. We see Bond makes a connection with her. We see he seriously wants to calm this chick down and protect her. This is the second time we see that there's something about Elektra that's really getting to Bond. Something more than the usual shag him and leave him attitude he usually has. And this could be a really interesting thing to follow and watch as Bond's tough demeanor starts to crack.
Em told me she was sending someone. Mister?
Bond. James Bond.
After the ski chase, Elektra and Bond's scene in her bedroom reveals she wants to be around him too.
Stay with me. Please.
Now things are starting to get complicated. Bond reluctantly declines her offer so he can go off to the casino scene. And then Bond tells Elektra,
You'll be safe here.
Why the heck does Bond think she's going to be safe here?
If your instincts are right, Renard will be back. And Elektra will be the next target.
M sent me because we're afraid your life might be in danger. We suspect there might be an insider.
It could be anyone, anywhere.
You'll be safe here.
Does this make sense to anyone? Unless he's just intentionally lying to her and just wants to go out for a drink. So Bond goes to Valentine's casino to get information, supposedly. But really, what does Valentine relay to Bond? Simply that Renard is a rogue element who could be working for any number of competitors to stop the construction of the King pipeline.
There are 4 competing pipelines. I'm willing to bet half the customers in this casino would be very happy to see the King pipeline disappear.
We knew that already. That was one of the first things Elektra tells Bond.
The Russians have 3 competing pipelines, and they'll do anything to stop me. My father was murdered. The villagers are rioting. And you, Mr. Bond, have come all this way to tell me that I might be in danger.
So the theory that Renard might have been hired by one of her competitors really isn't that mind-blowing. Then Elektra shows up in the casino. Why?
What are you doing here?
The same thing you are. Looking for the people who tried to kill me.
And how does she expect to do this? By playing a game of high card with Zukovsky. I just don't get it. She plays a high card game against Valentine and loses $1 million. She doesn't even question Zukovsky. Maybe he knows something. She goes right in, loses her game, and then leaves. So, what was the point of that? Okay, so at this point in the film, we're not supposed to know that Elektra is paying off Zukovsky for his big submarine. Which is actually one of the more interesting things about the film. Unlike Tomorrow Never Dies, where we knew exactly what was going on from the very beginning of the film, this time we know as much as Bond does, and the story is revealing itself to us as Bond is unraveling the mystery. Okay, cool. Unfortunately, when you look at all the pieces and actions of the characters, it really doesn't add up. Elektra's real purpose of being at Valentine's casino is to pay him off for the services of his nephew's submarine. $1 million. Now, I would think had Bond not have happened to have been there, she simply would have handed Zukovsky the check, maybe had a drink, and left. Easy deal. But because Bond is hanging out, she just can't hand over $1 million check to Valentine right in front of him. That kind of stuff can stick in people's minds. That could raise some red flags. Valentine seems to be aware of this too, since he goes along with the whole high card ruse. So instead of just giving the check to her dreadlocked henchman, telling him to give this to Zukovsky while she keeps 007 distracted, or subtly slipping it to Zukovsky herself, or even postponing the payout until Bond is not around, Elektra and Zukovsky do this improv bit about a high card game to win the money, for the sake of Bond, and then she immediately leaves the casino. It seems pretty stupid. Even if the film had Bond seen Elektra give a slip of paper to Zukovsky, not knowing what it is, but it ending up being another thing to add to his suspicions about what Elektra is exactly up to, might have been better. It's a pretty pointless scene to have, and they could have conveyed this information in a more economical fashion. Maybe keep Bond at Elektra's mansion guarding her, and have Bond see a known henchman of Zukovsky's be given a suitcase by Elektra's dreadlocked henchman outside, and have that raise his doubts about her and what she's exactly up to. Elektra, I saw the suitcase exchanged to Valentine's right-hand man. It was money, wasn't it? What are you up to, and what is your connection to Valentine? How dare you! I'm paying off my father's gambling debts to that snake Zukovsky. There are enough people trying to kill me. I don't need that fat caviar-eating animal after me, too. Oops, my bad. It's not even a clever trick by Valentine and Elektra to throw Bond off the scent that this is a payoff. It would have been more subtle if she just slipped the $1 million check under Valentine's door.
You're determined to protect me, aren't you?
Perhaps from yourself. You don't have to do this.
There's no point in living if you can't feel alive.
I don't even understand what Bond means. What is she doing? What is the goal to this? If I was Bond and I saw her playing high card, lose $1 million and then walk out, I'd be like, this chick is really unhinged. Forget Zukovsky's casino. and have Bond first encounter him at his caviar factory, where he goes to question him about what his connection is to Elektra. I don't know. Before the scene ends, a pretty pointless one to have, but I guess they had to get Bond into a tux and walk into a casino. Bond once again tells Elektra, essentially he would love to shag her, but he really can't, in so many words, and then inquires about Elektra's head of security, Davidoff.
What happened to Davidoff?
I gave him the night off.
Already, the film feels like it's dragging, so it's a relief when finally Renard makes his first appearance. Once again, big build-up to him as he reveals himself emerging from a cave in the Devil's Breath. Scary, there's fire and darkness, and guys with guns standing around. We learn Elektra's head of security, Davidoff, is working for Renard. Here we get our first and really only demonstration of Renard's painless trait, as he picks up a hot rock. He just picks it up. No pain. That's it. What a waste. Why spend all that time on setting up this bad guy gimmick if you never use it? They could have just made Renard an evil, scary terrorist. All that anticipation just to see the guy doesn't need to use an oven mitt. Big whoop. Brosnan was always said to be a combination of all the actors of Bond. Sort of all the best of them rolled into one. Looking at his 4 Bond films, I always thought of each one as a version of a particular Bond actor. GoldenEye was his Dalton film, having a personal stake with the villain and attempting to get a bit deeper into the character. Tomorrow Never Dies, Brosnan's updating of the classic Connery films and using them as a template. The World Is Not Enough, Brosnan's Lazenby, a more emotional story with the character and relationships being more concentrated on. It's got another ski chase, and the title is actually mentioned in Majesties. Oh yeah, Die Another Day. That's his over-the-top Roger Moore extravaganza. But that's for another time. I think it's around here that the film really starts to lose me, and begins to get more complicated than it should. Hopefully, if you're watching this review, you've seen the film already, and are fully aware that Elektra is in fact the villain of the film. Renard sometimes gets labeled as the villain, but I think of him as more of a henchman, and Elektra is really the true villain. Some say that World's story is too convoluted, confusing, and too hard to follow. I never thought it was the story's fault. The story itself, I think, is actually pretty good, and fairly straightforward. Elektra wants to eliminate some of her competition, thus making her oil more valuable. That's basically it. But it's told in such a muddled, uninspired way that it never gets me interested in what's going on or what's going to happen next. It's very bland and never really hooks me. I could complain again about the boring locations in the film, but really, if the story is interesting enough, then the forgettable locations in the film shouldn't even matter. Like, I wouldn't even notice them. The whole story could be filmed in one room for the entire movie. But because the story is really dragging, it gives me more time to notice the settings are, once again, pretty unexotic looking. After the oven mitt scene, we head back to Bond and Elektra. Now let's remember, Bond has begun falling for her. Since the beginning of the film, he's been touched by her experiences, her character, and probably her bod. But he has been maintaining this tough demeanor and keeping his distance.
Stay with me. Please.
I can't do that.
Shall we?
Elektra. This is a game I can't afford to play.
Apparently it's a line that no matter how much he wants to, he just can't cross. So the next scene opens up with Bond and Elektra in bed together. Did we miss something? I just don't get it. Here we have our main character struggling with this dilemma. I'd really like to shag her, but I really shouldn't. The mission comes first. Since first meeting her. At least I think that's the burden Bond is carrying. It's never really made that clear. Then the next time we see them, they're suddenly in bed together. What could have been one of the most important scenes in the film, one of the most interesting scenes for Bond in the entire story, is nowhere to be found. I certainly would have liked to see the moment when Bond makes his biggest mistake in the film, a decision he's going to regret by the closing credits. We got more of a seduction scene with Bond and the Doctor. Maybe even play out the scene in sort of a reversal of the classic Bond pickup scenes. Have Elektra do the smooth talking, saying all the right things, Bond crumbling into her arms and not realizing she's playing him like a fiddle. If they're going to decide to go down this road of telling a story of Bond being manipulated and used by this villainess, then go full out with it. Let's see him be played and embarrassed by how easily she's controlling him. Damn, I'm starting to sound like I'm rewriting the whole movie. It's a really awkward film. Anyway, after a shag that comes out of nowhere, Bond and Elektra share some intimate revelations to each other. Bond starts doing some snooping and discovers Davinoff is up to something and kills him. A pretty cold-hearted kill, actually. So now Bond knows that Elektra's head of security couldn't be trusted. Elektra is not safe with any of her people. Something that Bond should have known if he was paying attention to at the briefing at the beginning.
It could be anyone, anywhere.
We suspect there might be an insider.
Oh, so he did already know that. But maybe he just put it out of his mind or something. Maybe Renard is working with some of Elektra's own people. Who knows who else might be a threat to her? Maybe her being alone with dreadlocks puts her at risk. Instead of building on the potential impact of this discovery, Bond hops on a plane to Kazakhstan with a bunch of bald guys. See what I mean when I say this film is awkwardly put together? Bond poses as this scientist and just follows the lead. Plays it by ear, not knowing where he's going or what exactly will happen. It is a nice suspenseful idea, seeing Bond just winging it, doing some actual spy stuff, and it starts to get us curious to find out what surprises await him. Doing the standard 007 undercover thing, Bond gets to Kazakhstan, where we meet the last of the principals in the film. A nuclear physicist.
Hi, hey, do you want to play a game now? Okay, here, I help. One of these things is not like the other things. One of these things just doesn't belong. Can you guess which thing is not like the other thing before I finish my song?
Okay. A lot has been said about Denise Richards in this film. When they decided to plug her into this movie, they were just asking for all the criticism. Her casting just screams of pandering to a young audience and trying to be perceived as hip to those who only thought of James Bond as an old spy character. I don't think anyone can argue that. But, in her defense, we all know Bond films have always been known to have hot babes in them. Wherever Bond goes, there's going to be a ridiculously hot chick working at the hotel's front desk, being a secretary, hanging out in a casino, working for the villain, being a secret agent. They're everywhere. So naturally, if a nuclear scientist comes along, yeah, sure, she's going to be a hot chick. Okay, I'll go with that. My problem is, why did they have to cast an actress who can barely act? She is terrible. It's not like she was expected to just stand around posing, but she has to explain nuclear stuff and defuse a bomb.
Down there, it's all weapons-grade plutonium, reasonably safe. Up here, we've got hydrogen bombs that your lab built leaking tritium, which I've spent the last 6 months trying to clean up. So if you need any protection at all, it's from me.
Denise Richards is not at all convincing doing any of this. And quite frankly, I never thought she was that good looking anyway. I would take Cigar Girl over her any day. And then the film makes her even more of a joke, having her blatantly parade around in shorts and a tank top. So I guess I have to give them credit for not shying away from the reasons why she's there. For me, though, Marceau looks much sexier walking around in her bedsheets, and is much more believable in her role. We all know why they cast Richards. She was the hot babe of the moment. But at least put her in a part that she's more qualified to play. Like, how about one of these chicks? Plus, they give her a totally ridiculous, lazy name. It's not even funny sounding.
Miss?
Dr. Jones. Christmas Jones. And don't make any jokes, I've heard them all.
And it gets even worse at the very end of the film when we hear the embarrassing payoff line for apparently the only reason why they even gave her this Christmas name.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
It's so bad. It might be the worst line in the entire series. It's just so embarrassing. It's more Austin Powers sounding than James Bond. So Denise Richards does the film no favors, and she's completely out of place around all these other actors, and the dramatic story that they're trying to tell. It's kind of ironic when you think about the updating of the character done in GoldenEye, with Bond getting lectured for his sexist ways. The filmmakers are doing the same exact thing with the reasons for casting Richards.
Movie Line magazine just named you, quote, most fantasized about.
Well, that and some more money at the box office.
You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
Bond meets Christmas, heads down to the nuclear facility, and comes face to face with Renard. Brosnan takes advantage of this tougher Bond he is here, and all the anger he's feeling. He's nervous and pissed and just about ready to shoot Renard, and he's really good with all this. But that's really the best thing about the entire scene. The one thing I never understood was, why does Renard fall down after Bond hits him in the head? I thought he was supposed to feel no pain. I can understand that he would bleed, but he acts like that blow to the head hurt him, or at least it stuns him. Maybe they forgot about the no pain part there. Christmas blows Bond's cover, and an action sequence follows. Again, the Brosnan standard. Machine guns and explosions. Bond outruns some fire, not once, but twice in this scene. But he's too late as Renard gets away with the nuclear warhead and leaves Bond suspecting that Elektra might be involved in all this. The whole Kazakhstan diversion seems to be there just because Bond hasn't been involved in a big action scene for a while. So it's a chance to have some pyrotechnics, stunts, and gunplay, and remind everyone that this is indeed an action film. Oh, that and to give Brosnan and Carlyle an opportunity to meet up and to play a scene together. But the sequence just feels like a real disruption to what I thought was the main story between Bond and Elektra. The main point of this 20-minute sequence is that Renard steals the nuclear warhead. That's essentially it. There's the setup with the locator card that M will use to signal to Bond later, Bond's raised suspicions that Elektra's in cahoots with Renard, and the introduction of Christmas, but those could have been handled in a different way. Instead of having Bond veer away from the Elektra story, how about having the whole robbery of the warhead be done without Bond there? Since I'm in a rewriting mood, let's back up to the unnecessary casino scene. Bond still is trying to maintain a more professional demeanor with Elektra. He really wants to jump her bones, but he knows he shouldn't. Going back to her mansion, again he refuses the opportunity to spend the night with her. He sticks to his guns and his duty to the mission of protecting her, and stands guard watching over Elektra, making sure she's safe. Getting a little antsy just sitting around all night, Bond starts to do some snooping on the mansion's grounds, when he comes across Davinoff doing something suspicious. He ends up killing him. He goes through his pockets and discovers a mess of plans. Bond realizes that Davinoff was working for Renard, and Elektra is in danger. Not hesitating, Bond races back to her. Rushing into her bedroom panicked, Bond finds Elektra safe. He relaxes, and we see how concerned he was for her life. He begins going through the papers he found on Davidoff, when Elektra, seemingly so touched by how troubled Bond was for her safety, turns on her charm and coerces him into bed. We get to see the moment when Bond makes his biggest blunder in the story. He forgets all about the papers he found on Davidoff, which would have revealed to him that Renard was planning to rob the warhead from the Kazakhstan facility, and he could have stopped him. Or, if you really wanted to get Bond into an action scene here, he kills Davidoff. Bond realizes Elektra is in danger. We build up to an action scene in here as Bond interrupts another attempt on Elektra's life. An exciting chase after the alleged assassin, and Bond managing to get another clue to the bigger picture before the guy dies. Just do something to build on the momentum of Davidoff being found out to be a traitor. Bond is right on the cusp of learning that the Kazakhstan facility has been targeted by Renard, but Elektra distracts him with sweet talk while wearing one of her bedsheets. Either way, by the end of the film we see that Bond was being played by Elektra, and she was manipulating him like a naive little schoolboy. At which point we see Renard, easily going into the nuclear facility, has his guys kill a bunch of the scientists, and he flies away with the warhead without any trouble. You can have an action scene take place without Bond in it. So where would he be during all this? He would be getting swooned by Elektra. Bond discovers later that he could have warned M that Renard was going to steal the warhead, had he taken the time to piece together the clues that were found on Davidoff, and not have been so focused on Elektra. He gets reprimanded by M. Bond tries to save face by telling M they can track the warhead with the locator card they all come with, when a nuclear physicist shows up who survived the attack, and Christmas hands the locator card over to M. Bond is a bit humiliated and starts to suspect he's being used as Elektra's little tool. Bond wouldn't have encountered Renard yet, and the character would continue hanging over him like a dark shadow in the story. And we would know that eventually there would still be a confrontation between them, that hopefully will warrant the wait. I don't know. Maybe it could have worked. But Bond just takes this detour hitching a ride with the Telly Savalas fan club, and we hang out in Kazakhstan for 20 minutes. I think I would have rather followed that female 00 agent on her mission, and see what she's up to. Arriving back from Kazakhstan, Bond returns to Elektra, where he confronts her about his suspicions about her and Renard. Brosnan is pretty lousy in this scene. He sounds like an over-the-top whiner.
There's no point in living if you can't feel alive. Isn't that right, Elektra? Isn't that your motto?
What are you talking about?
Or did you steal it from your old friend, Renard?
What?
He and I had a little chat this morning. Knew all about us, knew about my shoulder, knew exactly where to hurt me.
The rest of the film he's pretty good in, but I think he's pretty bad in this scene. As M arrives into the story, Bond makes the suggestion that maybe Elektra is responsible for all this. His tip-off of her using one of Renard's mottos and how Renard knew that he had an injured shoulder. Another rewrite rant. It might have been cool had Bond still been blinded by Elektra, and have M be the one to make the suggestion that maybe she's not all that she appears. Remember, M and Elektra have the longer history together, going back to M's role in her kidnapping. Sir Robert was M's friend who had been killed. While Bond can't distance himself to get a clear perspective on what's been happening, M begins to put the pieces together. If you're going to give M a bigger role in the film, why not use her and show that she's an intelligent boss who could conceivably be ahead of Bond in the story? Bond and Christmas set out to stop a nuclear bomb in the oil pipeline. It's a pretty silly sequence with them riding on this speeding rig and Christmas is there to defuse the bomb. They had to figure out a way to bring Christmas Jones with them, so... This is really the first major action scene where computer graphics practically completely replace stunt work in the series. And it looks pretty bad. Actually, the simple computer graphics that everyone is watching on the screens, along with their concerned close-ups, is more effective and sells the sequence better than the CGI used in the pipeline. The classic stunt work the series had always been known for has just been replaced by special effects, and it's really disappointing. This stuff is not going to make any highlight reels. Richards is made to say a lot of technobabble, and wouldn't make me feel too confident that she could save my pipeline. Thank you. Brosnan and Richards jump off the rig, even though it's going 70 miles an hour, and as usual, they narrowly escape an explosion. Always an explosion. Elektra reveals she's the true villain and kidnaps M. Bond realizes that he's been played, and he and Christmas set out to pay a visit to Valentine. The series had already visited Istanbul way back in the day, and it looked much more exotic than it does here. I'm not sure what's going on with these films. M spends the majority of her time left on screen, sitting in a cell. Here we learn what Elektra's motivation is for doing all of this.
Your father My father was nothing. His kingdom he stole from my mother. The kingdom I will rightly take back.
I'm not sure where this came from. First time I ever heard her talk about her mother. Would have been nice to have that seed planted somewhere in the story, so when it's revealed this is the reason behind Elektra's big plans, it would make a little bit of sense. Instead of just coming out of nowhere. Might have helped. But the film starts to pull a lot of things out of its ass. The film fulfills the promise on making the villains more complicated and less one-dimensional, by giving us a look at Elektra and Renard privately. They're not spending time doing the usual sinister things we've seen Bond villains do in the past, stroking white cats, feeding piranhas, but they are revealing their feelings and showing some human vulnerability. It's an okay scene. At this point I think Elektra has a subtle change to her character, now that the secret of her being evil is out. She's got a bit more ominous and girlish edge to her when she sees Renard. It's not so far removed from the wholesome and mature demeanor she's had throughout the film. But a little while later, there's a drastic change in her performance where she's running around like a spoiled teenager, rather than the intelligent, sophisticated woman we've known her as. It's really strange, and it just comes out of left field. It's a major mood swing the character takes for the final act. Oh, she does look good in another bedsheet, though. Renard, I just don't get. He punches a table without any problem. But then this whole painless gimmick disappears when he's faced fighting with Bond. Like when it would be a pretty helpful quality to have, and the one scene we've been waiting for since we learned about the guy. I don't know. Maybe this condition comes and goes. Right when the tension should be at its zenith, the quintessential clock is ticking. M needs saving, and Bond should be racing to rescue her and save the world. The film takes another detour for an action scene with those bladed helicopters we saw earlier in the film. Seemingly because we haven't had an action scene for a while. It's not a very good one. It's dark and disjointed, and I'm never sure where everything is in relation to each other. It's just a maze of wooden walkways. As always, plenty of explosions that Bond avoids, along with running away from the blades and a bunch of miniatures getting blown up. It's a pretty forgettable sequence and just interrupts the flow the film had going for it again. Actually trying to adhere to the Bond formula I think just hurts the telling of this particular story. Instead of changing the format in which this story is told to better effect, the film tries to fit it into the standard Bond blueprint, with all the traditional elements, and results in dialogue scenes that drag and action scenes that feel more disruptive than anything else. It's very odd. The one thing a Bond movie should never be is boring, and that's kind of what happens with World. M gets her own little suspenseful scene trying to get the locator card working, so she can signal to Bond and let him know where she is. It's kind of pointless though, since despite getting the card working and signaling to Bond her location, Bond and Christmas end up getting captured anyway and are taken to where she is. Well, I guess it pays off for Bond since Zukovsky knows where to go and he ends up saving him from Elektra. Bond and Christmas eventually get captured, after first avoiding another explosion. Brosnan manages to crowbar the title of the film into his dialogue, to try to make it logical as to why the film is called The World Is Not Enough. It still seems like a pretty random choice, though. Elektra gets Bond into this torture chair. Not a bad scene. Elektra reveals that she has indeed been working with Renard and planned this out during her kidnapping, when her father and M decided not to pay her ransom, even going so far as doing a Van Gogh on herself to make it all look pretty convincing. Brosnan's Bond doesn't get into situations too often when he legitimately looks like he's close to buying it. It happens on such rare occasions that when a scene like this happens, it gets my attention. Even though he quickly goes back to his indestructible character and he'll be swimming to the surface from the bottom of the ocean without any problem. He doesn't even use a snorkel. Brosnan is good being slowly strangled to death and really sells the whole scene. Elektra goes into this childish behavior and suddenly brags how she's so irresistible to all men and Bond would never be able to kill her. It's pretty perplexing, but it gets played right up to her death. Valentine shows up and he and Bond share a nice unspoken moment before he dies and allows Bond an opportunity to escape the chair and chases after Elektra, who acts as if she's playing a childish game of tag with Bond. Again, this whole thing...
James! You can't kill me! Not in cold blood!
I don't know where it's coming from. I understand that now Bond knows Elektra is bad, and she can drop her innocent act and freely be as villainous as she wants to be. But her behavior looks like a complete turnaround for her character. Again, no kind of setup to this idea that Elektra should feel completely safe if she was ever at the other end of Bond's gun barrel. And that Bond would never be able to kill a woman he had such strong feelings for, or something. So Elektra's arrogant attitude doesn't make too much sense. This just gets pulled out of nowhere.
You wouldn't kill me. You'd miss me.
Again, Brosnan is really good in this scene. He seriously looks like a lot is going on in his head. When he suddenly shoots Elektra, the final gunshot, it's a nice jolt. I sometimes thought they could have gone with a different end for Elektra, and have M be the one who kills her. Bond hesitates having to kill Elektra. That idea would have actually been set up in the film. She's about to fulfill her plan, and M, out of nowhere, caps her. Seeing M actually fire a gun would have been a first for the series, but it could have been the final closing chapter for the longer backstory they had between each other, going back to Elektra's kidnapping. M would be personally responsible for avenging Sir Robert's death. Plus, it would have given Judi Dench more to do than just sit in a cell for the final act of the film. Just a thought. Bond and Elektra's confrontation should have been the big climax of the film. They're the two characters that were at the center of the story, and we were following their relationship from that first shared glance they had at Sir Robert's funeral. The film should have wrapped things up here, with a final briefing in M's office. But, as with Bond tradition, we need a bigger, explosive finale, and still had to deal with Renard, the bomb on the submarine, and save Christmas.
I must stop Christmas from coming.
But all this just feels like a tacked-on ending. The whole sequence on the submarine is all pretty anticlimactic. The sub crashes, everyone flies all over the place, Bond has to do some major Aquaman stuff. None of this is really that riveting. Bond and Renard finally get into their fight, and it's a major letdown. The no pain gimmick is not used, Bond's injured shoulder is forgotten, and the whole fight and Renard's death is very average. It's all pretty tedious. It almost feels like the filmmakers just rushed through this final climax and forgot to add any suspense or excitement to it. They did remember to get Denise Richards wet, though. which I suppose was expected to be a great selling point by the filmmakers. If you really feel the need to have the whole ludicrous submarine scene, don't put it at the end of the film. Get it out of the way earlier. Bond stops Renard, saves Christmas, sub blows up, Bond makes his way back to the castle, saves M, and finally confronts and kills Elektra. That's the climax the story seemed to be naturally building to. Bond and Christmas escape the submarine before it explodes, but manage to swim to the surface. They're really pushing the believability to all this. Bond strapped in that torture chair had more tension than any of this stuff. At least let Bond use that inflatable jacket to provide the escape to the surface for him and Christmas, or something. No, they'll just swim it. Yeah, right. What started as an intimate character-driven story that was to make the Bond character more relatable ends on a pretty silly, over-the-top ending. They should have just ended all this at the castle. So Bond saves the day. After all the conflicted emotions that Bond was feeling and the deep mark Elektra supposedly left on him, maybe we would end the film with something dramatic and unexpected. Something that would indicate Bond really was emotionally hurt by Elektra and feel some kind of guilt or remorse or something over the whole thing. Instead, Bond simply shags the nuclear bimbo and says that stupid joke, just because that's what's expected in a Bond film. In comparison with Connery and Moore's third Bond films, The World Is Not Enough feels very tired. Instead of the Brosnan age hitting its stride, it was already feeling pretty old. Despite Denise Richards getting a lot of negative attention as Christmas, let's face it, her casting is an easy target for criticism in the film, and I certainly would agree with it. But I think the film has much bigger problems than her trying to act like she has a PhD. Out of all of Brosnan's Bond films, I sometimes think World could have had the potential to be his best one, even if it is a bit Lifetime movie-ish at times. It could have explored aspects in the character that would have been new and interesting to see. Instead, it begins unraveling very quickly and ends up as the most uneventful film in the Brosnan age. To his credit, though, I think Brosnan gives his best Bond performance in any of his films in World. He handled giving Bond more dimensions very well and really deserved to be put in a better film. I give the filmmakers credit for trying to make the Bond character a bit more complex this time around, and giving him a female villain. But they seem to be mainly depending on Brosnan to just run from explosions, and the story would just mechanically follow the Bond blueprint, and they would just hope it all works. It's like they're thinking it's just enough to have these interesting ideas, and not do anything with them. The villain is Bond's friend, Bond's former flame, a villain who is immune to pain. All great ideas, but they just never take the risk of exploring them. It's like they don't want to take advantage of all the stuff that these ideas could potentially provide in the films. It would help if, they gave Brosnan more to work with. Everyone had these expectations that Brosnan would save the series. He did make Bond popular again, and financially, the films were successful. Despite World ending up being one of the more unremarkable films in the series, it still was extremely successful. Having grossed more than each of his two previous Bond films, the producers seemed to know what they were doing. I guess casting Denise Richards as a nuclear physicist paid off. But despite the financial success, the films were seriously suffering from a lack of creativity at this point. However, hope was on the horizon. 2002 would mark the series' 40th anniversary, and Brosnan's next Bond film would be the 20th in the official series. Setting their sights on marking both occasions, the filmmakers were sure to make note of these milestones, and hopefully give Bond fans an entry in the series they would never forget.
I'm looking for a submarine. It's big and black, and the driver is a very good friend of mine.